The trail had been clear all morning, wide and well-marked. But by late afternoon, Alex realized they hadn't seen a blaze in nearly an hour. "Maybe we missed one," Ryan muttered, scanning the endless pines. Their trunks rose straight and tall, uniform as soldiers, the canopy blotting out most of the sun. The air was thick with resin, heavy and still. Alex checked the map again, frustration boiling. "We should have looped back by now. This isn't even on the chart." Ryan tried to laugh, though it came out strained. "Guess we're pioneers now." They pressed forward, but the forest grew denser, swallowing the path behind them until it seemed they hadn't been on one at all. The silence deepened. No birds, no insects, no sound but the crunch of pine needles underfoot. When the light began to fade, panic crept in. That's when Alex noticed a narrow track breaking through the underbrush. Not a marked trail, more like a deer path, but worn, deliberate, as if used often. "Maybe it leads to the road," said Ryan, hopefully. They followed it until the trees parted into a small clearing. There, hunched at the center, stood a cabin. Its roof sagged, boards warped with age, but smoke stains blackened the chimney, and the door looked recently repaired. Ryan frowned. "This isn't on the map, right?" Alex shook his head slowly. "No, and I don't think it's supposed to be." The door creaked open with little effort, hinges moaning into the still air. Dust floated in the last beams of dusk, yet the room didn't feel abandoned. A fireplace sat against the far wall, charred wood still blackened from a recent fire. On the table, a lantern stood ready, its glass smudged but full of oil. A tin plate with crumbs rested beside it, as if someone had eaten here not long ago. Ryan ran a hand across the tabletop. "Someone's been here, recently." Alex scanned the walls, and his stomach tightened. Carvings scarred the wood, deep scratches layered over one another. Some were symbols he didn't recognize, jagged spirals and crude shapes. Others were words, gouged so hard the wood splintered. "Don't stay after dark." They circled the trees. "Run." Ryan forced a laugh. Probably just campers messing around. Alex didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the floorboards. Fresh boot prints led from the door to the fireplace and back again. Still, night was closing fast, and neither brother wanted to stumble blind through the forest. "We'll stay until morning," Alex said finally, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. Ryan nodded, relief plain. They unrolled their sleeping bags in the corner. The lantern's warm glow pushed the shadows back just far enough. But outside, the pines leaned close, their black shapes pressing against the windows, and the silence of the forest felt like it was waiting. The cabin creaked in the night air, timbers shifting as if they resented the weight of new occupants. Alex lay on his side, eyes open, listening. The lantern burned low, its flame twitching against the glass. Then came the first tap. A sharp sound against the outer wall, too clean to be a falling pine cone, too deliberate to ignore. Ryan sat up. "You heard that right?" Alex nodded, holding his breath. Another tap,
this time near the window. The brothers froze, listening as the noises multiplied. Small scratches, faint drags, the rhythm of something circling the cabin. The sound moved from wall to wall, steady, patient. Alex crept to the window and dared a glance through the narrow slit in the curtain. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping between the pines. When he blinked, it was gone. Then a whisper brushed the glass. "Alex." He staggered back, pulse hammering. "It said my name!" Ryan's face drained of color. "Don't mess with me!"
The whisper came again, softer this time, threading through the cracks in the boards. "Ryan." The lantern flickered violently, shadows stretching long and thin across the cabin walls. Neither brother spoke again. They sat rigid, back to back, listening as the unseen footsteps resumed their slow, deliberate circle around the cabin. The tapping grew louder, harder, until it was no longer polite scratching, but insistent knocks, as if fists pounded to be let in. The walls trembled under the rhythm. Ryan covered his ears. "It's everywhere at once." Alex gripped the lantern, lifting it higher. Its glow trembled, illuminating the windows. For a fleeting second, he saw them, faces pressed against the glass. Not whole faces, not human, pale smears of features, eyes too wide, mouths stretched into shapes no lips should form. They leaned close, fogging the panes, then melted back into the dark like smoke. Ryan lurched toward the door, fumbling for the handle. "We have to get out!" The moment his fingers brushed the knob, it rattled violently, locked from the outside. The boards groaned, the cabin itself shuddering under the pressure of unseen hands. "Ryan!" Alex shouted. He pulled him back just as the lantern guttered low, throwing the room into half-darkness. Shadows lengthened across the floor, moving though neither of them did. The pounding stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse. Then from every side came the whispers, layered voices hissing through the cracks in the walls. "Stay! Stay! Stay!" The sound rose in unison, wrapping the cabin in a chorus of hunger. Alex clutched Ryan's arm. "If we survive this night, we run, no matter what." Ryan didn't argue. He only nodded, his eyes fixed on the door that had slammed shut on its own. The whispers died just before dawn, slipping away as if the light had chased them. For the first time in hours, the forest outside stirred with the faintest sounds, birdsong, the rustle of branches. Alex and Ryan wasted no time. They shoved their gear into packs, leaving the lantern still smoking on the table, and forced the cabin door open. It swung wide easily now, hinges smooth, no sign of resistance. The clearing was quiet, bathed in gray morning light. "Which way?" Ryan asked, his voice hoarse. "Anywhere but here," Alex muttered. They struck out along the path they thought they'd come in on. The forest closed around them, pine trunks blurring into sameness. They walked fast, then jogged, convinced that if they kept moving, they'd eventually hit the marked trail. An hour passed, then two. The sun climbed higher,
but the trees never thinned. Every bend in the path looked the same. Finally, the trail opened. Ryan froze. The clearing stretched before them once more, and at its center stood the cabin. The same sagging roof, the same chimney scarred black, the door slightly ajar, as if waiting. "No," Alex whispered. His legs gave out, dropping him to his knees. "We left! We left!" Ryan backed away, shaking his head, eyes wide. "We've been walking in circles." But deep down, they both knew it wasn't a circle. The forest had turned itself inside out, folding paths until all roads led back here. The door of the cabin creaked wider. Inside, the lantern flickered to life on its own, casting a golden glow across the dark threshold, as if it had been expecting them all along.
Daniel had always preferred solitude. Group hikes felt noisy and rushed. He wanted silence, space to think. That's why he ignored the warnings in the trailhead logbook and chose the cliffs for his overnight camp. Most hikers came for the view, snapped their photos, and moved on. The cliffs dropped nearly 200 feet straight into fog-thick valleys, the air sharp and cool even in midsummer. But beside the neat scrawls of mileage and dates in the logbook, one entry stood out, written in heavy black marker. "Don't camp near the cliffs. The wind doesn't belong to itself." Daniel had chuckled, assuming it was another hiker's attempt at spooking tourists. By late afternoon, he had pitched his tent in a small clearing just beyond the tree line, close enough to hear the faint crash of distant waterfalls, far enough from the drop to feel safe. The sunset painted the rock face in bands of red and gold, and for a moment the whole valley looked aflame. He brewed a cup of coffee on his camp stove, stretching his legs toward the warmth. The forest seemed calm, too calm. When the breeze picked up, it came in sharp bursts, funneling through the cliffs like a whistle. At first, it was almost musical, a long rising note, but then it shifted, lower, harsher, as though the rocks themselves groaned. Daniel shook his head, smiling nervously. Just the wind. But long after darkness fell, that sound would not stop. By the time the stars blinked awake above the valley, the wind had changed. It no longer whistled, but carried a sharper edge, a ragged tone that seemed to shred the silence. Daniel lay on his back, staring at the nylon roof of his tent, listening. At first, he told himself it was just the natural funneling of air along stone. But then the noise bent into something else, higher pitched, jagged, wavering like a human voice pushed past its limit. A scream. He sat up quickly, heart pounding. "Coyotes," he muttered to himself. "Foxes. Animals scream too." But even as he said it, the sound didn't match. It was layered, echoing, too many voices at once. The wind rushed, dipped, then rose into a keening wail that sent goosebumps racing across his skin. And then, within the howl, he heard his name, Daniel. He froze, every muscle locked. Daniel. It wasn't a shout. It was soft, threaded into the air, almost lost beneath the gust. If not for the way his blood turned cold, he could have convinced himself it was imagination. Shaking, he unzipped the tent and stepped into the night. The clearing glowed faintly under starlight, trees swaying in an uneasy rhythm. The cliffs loomed just beyond, blacker than the sky. The wind died for a moment, leaving the forest too still. Then it surged again, and from deep within the valley, another scream rose, long, mournful, undeniably human. Daniel's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the mist. He moved closer to the cliffs, every step crunching over damp stone and pine needles. The valley below stretched into blackness, fog curling upward like smoke. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then, just at the edge of his light, something shifted. Shapes. At first, they looked like branches moving in the wind, but there was no wind. The fog thickened, and within it, forms took shape. Tall, thin silhouettes drifting just beneath the cliff's rim. Daniel's breath caught. One of the shapes reached upward. A hand, pale and rigid, fingers too long, nails scraping stone as it tried to pull itself higher. Another followed, and another. The cliff face seemed alive with grasping hands, dozens of them clawing against the rock before sliding back into the fog. Daniel stumbled away, nearly dropping his light. His mind scrambled for explanation. Fatigue, shadows, tricks of starlight. But deep down, he knew those hands hadn't been illusions. Something was trying to climb up. He sprinted back to his tent, chest heaving. The screams rose with him, louder now, weaving through the night like a chorus. Each cry twisted into another, filling the valley with a grief so sharp it felt almost physical. Inside his tent, he zipped the flap and pressed his palms to his ears. It did nothing. The screams cut straight through fabric, through flesh, sinking deep into his bones. And they weren't stopping. Daniel fed the fire until it blazed high, hoping light would push the terror back. But the flames only cast jagged shadows that danced across the clearing like figures circling him. The screams never stopped. Sometimes they sounded distant, carried on the valley wind. Other times they were close, so close it felt like someone was shrieking directly into his ear. He sat rigid, clutching his flashlight, eyes stinging from smoke and sleeplessness. At one point the voices dipped, overlapping into a low moan that seemed to vibrate the ground. Daniel dared a glance at the tree line, and his stomach dropped. Figures stood between the pines, dozens of them, barely visible, pale forms swaying in rhythm with the wind. As the flares flared, they dissolved into mist. When it dimmed, they reappeared, closer each time. Daniel shouted, voice cracking, "Stay away!" The flames guttered suddenly, plunging half the clearing into shadow. In that darkness, something brushed against the tent's fabric, a slow drag, like fingers tracing a circle around it. He stumbled backward, eyes locked on the canvas as it rippled under invisible touch. Then silence fell, total, absolute silence. It lasted only a breath. Then every voice screamed at once. The cliffs howled, the trees shuddered, and Daniel dropped to his knees, clamping his hands over his head. All he could do was wait for morning and pray the fire held out. When the first weak light of dawn touched the treetops, the voices stopped. Daniel lifted his head slowly, ears ringing in the new silence. The fire was nothing but ash and smoke, his clothes damp with dew, his body shaking from exhaustion. For a long while he stayed crouched, afraid to believe it was over. Finally, he forced himself to the cliffs. The valley below was calm now, fog drifting lazily like river mist. No shapes moved within it, no screams, just the ordinary hush of morning. But the rock face told another story. Handprints covered it, dozens, maybe hundreds, pressed into the stone as though burned there. Some were small, childlike. Others were stretched impossibly long, fingers twisted, claw-like. They glistened faintly with moisture, as if freshly made. Daniel staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His own footprints were the only ones near his tent. No intruders, no evidence anyone else had been there. Yet he knew what he had seen. He packed in a frenzy, shoving gear into his bag, hands trembling. By the time he hit the trail, the sun was rising fully, birds finally calling in the distance. The forest felt alive again, almost normal. At the ranger station, he tried to explain. The ranger listened quietly, arms folded. When Daniel described the screams, the man's jaw tightened. "You're not the first to hear them," the ranger said. "Locals call that ridge the Screaming Cliffs. Folks vanish up there sometimes. Others come back like you, shaken." Daniel's throat was dry. "What are they?" The ranger only shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Best advice? Don't camp alone out here, especially not near the cliffs." Daniel never did again.
The trail was supposed to loop back to the parking lot in under 3 hours. That's what the map said anyway. But Jenna checked her watch for the 5th time and felt her chest tighten. They had been hiking for almost 5, and the forest still pressed thick and endless around them. Mark tried to sound calm. "We probably just missed a marker. Keep moving. Once we hit the ridge, we'll see the road." But the ridge never came. The pines thickened, branches twisting together overhead until dusk seeped in faster than it should. The air cooled sharply, carrying the earthy scent of moss and wet bark. Jenna pulled out her phone. No service. The battery hovered at 9%. She stuffed it back in her pocket, pulse quickening. "We need to turn back." Mark shook his head. "We'll waste daylight. Forward's better." So they pushed on. Each step seemed to sink them deeper into silence. No bird calls, no insects, not even the usual rustle of squirrels darting through brush. Just their footsteps, crunching too loudly on the leaf litter. By the time the last glow of sun bled away between the trees, Jenna's nerves were raw. Her flashlight beam skimmed across the trunks, catching faint blazes of old trail paint, long faded. Mark stopped suddenly. "Wait!" Through the trees ahead, faint yellow light flickered, a square glow, steady against the dark. Jenna's breath hitched. A building? Out here? The trees parted just enough to reveal the outline of a structure. 2 stories, wood siding, and a faded sign. Ranger Station 14. The ranger station looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The paint peeled in long strips, and the porch sagged on one corner. Yet from inside, a faint yellow glow pulsed, steady as lamplight. Mark pushed the door. It creaked, but swung open easily.
The lobby smelled of mildew and old coffee. Papers littered the counter, corners curling with age. A mug, half full of dark liquid, sat near a typewriter. The surface filmed over, but untouched, as though someone had set it down minutes ago. "Hello?" Jenna called, her voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The radio on the desk crackled faint static, bursting every so often with a hiss that made them both flinch. Old trail maps were pinned to the walls, some of them marked with red X's. Mark picked up a clipboard from the counter. Pages listed hiker permits, each neatly signed and dated, but the last entry was from over 20 years ago. Jenna's skin prickled. This doesn't make sense. The lights are on. The stairwell loomed in the corner, narrow and shadowed. A floorboard creaked above them. Jenna's hand shot to Mark's arm. "Did you hear?" Another creak, heavier this time, like someone walking. Mark forced a laugh. Probably an old building settling, but his voice lacked conviction. The radio hissed again, and beneath the static, for the briefest second, Jenna swore she heard a voice whispering her name. The creaks above grew deliberate, measured steps crossing the floor. Dust sifted down from the ceiling with each one. Mark tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Hello, Ranger?" His voice cracked, brittle in the silence. No answer. Jenna edged toward the stairs, despite every nerve screaming not to. The wooden steps groaned under her weight, each one louder than the last. At the landing, she aimed her light down the hall. Every door stood closed. A faint trail of dust coated the floor, unbroken. She pushed the first door open. Inside, 2 bunks, mattresses stripped, a thin layer of dust covering the frames. No footprints, no sign of anyone living here. Yet the sound of footsteps moved again, directly behind them, then suddenly at the far end of the hall. The air grew colder. Jenna's breath fogged in the beam of light. She staggered back, nearly colliding with Mark. "Place is empty," he whispered, though his own eyes darted to the ceiling, as if listening to something still moving above. The radio downstairs hissed louder, static spilling into words. They rushed back, heartbeats thundering in sync with the crackle. A voice emerged, garbled, stretched, impossible to tell if male or female. "Lost, still here, can't leave." Jenna clutched the counter, knuckles white. "That's not a broadcast." The voice faded, then silence, heavy and final, until the radio clicked again, sharp and clear, as if someone leaned directly into the mic. The radio spat once, then steadied. "Don't go outside." The words were clear this time, not garbled, calm, firm, as if the speaker was right in the room with them. Jenna froze. "Did you hear?" "Yeah," Mark whispered. His hand hovered near the door handle, knuckles pale. The radio hissed again, repeating the same phrase, "Don't go outside, don't go outside." Jenna's chest tightened. She backed away from the windows just as something brushed across the glass. A shadow moved past, tall and thin, blotting out what little moonlight seeped through the blinds. Then another followed, and another. Figures circling. Mark gripped the flashlight like a weapon. "We can't stay here." "Jenna, they told us not to go out," she snapped, voice trembling. "Yeah? And what? Wait for whatever's walking around out there to come in?" The shadows dragged long fingers across the panes. A faint tap, tap, tap echoed in rhythm with Jenna's pounding heart. The air felt heavy, pressing down, every instinct begging them not to open the door. The radio clicked again, softer this time. They're waiting. Jenna swallowed hard, throat dry. "Mark, if we leave, we die. If we stay..."
The doorknob rattled suddenly, as if something tested it from the other side. Mark's jaw clenched. "We run on 3. The voice on the radio hissed one final time. "Don't." 1, 2. Mark yanked the door open on 3. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of pine and something fouler beneath. The flashlight beam caught nothing but empty trees, yet both of them felt the press of movement all around. "Go!" Mark hissed. They sprinted down the porch steps, boots hammering gravel. The forest swallowed their light instantly, the station's glow shrinking behind them. Branches clawed at their clothes, but they didn't dare slow down. Halfway down the trail, Jenna risked a glance back. The ranger station stood in the dark clearing, but its windows no longer glowed. Every light inside had gone out. The building hunched like a carcass, empty and silent. "Mark!" she gasped, tugging his arm. "It's gone dark! Keep running!" They pushed on until their legs buckled. By the time the forest thinned and the moon revealed the gravel lot, they collapsed against their car, lungs heaving. Neither spoke for a long while. Only when dawn bled gray across the trees did they finally drive toward the park entrance. At the gate, a fresh-faced ranger in a clean uniform leaned from the booth. "Everything all right?" Mark forced a laugh. "We thought we found Ranger Station 14, but it's..." The ranger's expression hardened. "Station 14's been closed since '98. Fire took out the second floor. Hasn't had power since." Jennan's blood ran cold. The ranger tilted his head. "You two shouldn't be out here after dark." Behind them, in the rising light, the trees swayed gently. For just a second, Jenna thought she saw dark figures standing between the trunks, watching them leave.
The old Subaru groaned as it climbed the last stretch of winding road, the forest thickening on either side. Pines leaned inward, their branches knitting together to block most of the sunlight. When the road finally opened onto the small gravel lot, the four friends exhaled in relief. They had reached the lake trailhead. Ethan, always the loudest of the group, leapt out first. "See? Totally worth it," Middle of nowhere, no crowds, and look at this view. The lake glimmered below, still and glassy, framed by dark trees that seemed to drink in the light. A wooden sign creaked in the breeze, the paint chipped. Ravenwood State Park, Trail 3, closed for maintenance. Someone had spray painted over it in red, "Stay out after dark." "Cheery," muttered Kayla, adjusting her pack. The ranger they'd spoken to earlier at the park entrance had only given vague warnings. Some trails are under repair. Stick close to the main loop. His eyes had lingered too long, as though weighing whether to say more. Still, none of them were willing to turn back after 3 hours of driving. They unloaded tents, sleeping bags, and food, hiking the narrow trail that wound down toward the lakeshore. The air grew cooler the closer they came to the water. Birds that had chirped noisily at the lot fell silent. Chris glanced over his shoulder, uneasy. "Feels like we're the only people left in the park." Ethan grinned, ignoring the shiver that passed through the others. "Exactly. Our own private wilderness." By dusk, the tents were pitched on a soft patch of pine needles near the shore. The lake turned from silver to ink as the sun slid behind the ridge. Chris coaxed a fire to life. Sparks spiraled up and vanished into the dark like small escaping souls. The smell of wood smoke wrapped around them, warm and familiar, but it didn't chase away the cold that crept from the water. They ate in a loose circle. Foil-wrapped potatoes, too sweet trail mix, jokes that landed softer than they should have. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called once, then fell silent, as if it had remembered something and thought better of speaking again. Ethan bounced his knee, eyes on the ridge that rose jagged against the last blue smear of sky. "There's gotta be a lookout up there. 10 minutes up, 10 back. I'll get a shot of the stars." Kayla shook her head. "Trail's closed. Ranger said to stick to the loop." "He said, preferably," Ethan countered, falsely casual. He grabbed his flashlight and phone. "I'll be right back." "Take a whistle," Chris said, already regretting the suggestion. He tossed one over. It landed in the dust at Ethan's feet. Ethan smirked, pocketed it, and lifted the beam toward the trees. The light cut a thin tunnel through the first ranks of trunks, swallowed quickly by the rest. Back in 20. He disappeared into the dark, the forest closing behind him with a sound like breath being held. They waited. The fire sank lower. Minutes stretched thin, then thinner. "Text him," Kayla said. No signal, just the fire's whisper, the soft lap of water, and faintly, from somewhere uphill, a single, distant laugh that didn't sound like Ethan's. An hour passed, then 2. Ethan still hadn't returned. Chris stood, brushing ash from his hands. "That's it. We're going after him." Kayla frowned. "We can't just run blind into the woods at night." But the alternative, sitting in silence while Ethan's absence stretched into something heavier, was unbearable. They grabbed flashlights and split into pairs. Chris with Kayla, Marcus trailing a few yards behind. The forest devoured their light. Each beam revealed only a few feet of ground before being swallowed by the trees. The path quickly dissolved into tangled roots and damp leaves, no clear trail at all. "Ethan," Chris shouted. his voice bouncing back in fragments. Somewhere deeper, a crunch of branches, then a laugh, brief, sharp, echoing strangely. Kayla stiffened. That wasn't him. They pressed on, breath clouding in the cold. Their lights skimmed across tree trunks carved with strange marks, spirals, crosshatches, shapes that looked half like runes, half like scratches from claws. The wood around them seemed to pulse in the beam's glare. Marcus swore under his breath. Who the hell does this out here? Then Kayla froze. Just ahead, a flashlight beam flickered between the trees. Ethan's. Relief surged, and they stumbled toward it. But as they drew closer, the light bobbed once, twice, and vanished. In its place, silence fell again. Too complete, too heavy. Chris's throat tightened. For the first time, he wondered if Ethan had ever been the one holding that light at all. They didn't sleep. By dawn, the three of them were stiff with cold and fear, waiting for the first ranger truck to arrive. Two officers in forest green uniforms stepped out, their boots crunching gravel. Dogs leapt from the back, straining at their leashes. Relief swept over Chris until he noticed the rangers' faces, tired, wary, as if they already knew how this would end. "Your friend wandered off trail?" one asked. "Yeah," Chris said. "Toward the ridge, around 9. He never came back." The ranger nodded once, lips pressed thin. "We'll search. You three stay at camp." The dogs searched forward, noses to the dirt, pulling toward the tree line. But within minutes, they slowed. One whined, another planted its paws, refusing to go further. Their hackles rose, eyes fixed on the lake. The ranger tugged the leash, frowning. "They won't track past here." Kayla's voice cracked. "Why not?" The ranger hesitated. "Sometimes they just don't. This isn't the first time we've had incidents. Hikers vanish near the water. No remains ever recovered." Marcus stiffened. "And you didn't warn us?" The ranger's gaze darkened. "We tell people to stay on the loop. You didn't listen." Chris's fists clenched. "So what? He's just gone. That's it." The ranger didn't answer. Instead, he looked past Chris, out across the still black lake. Something rippled there, though no wind touched the surface. They should have packed up and left, but none of them could bear the thought of abandoning Ethan without answers. So they stayed one last night, the fire burning low, the tent zipped tight against the chill. The park felt different after dark. The forest no longer seemed empty, but crowded, every shadow a figure, every rustle a step. They whispered Ethan's name once or twice, then stopped. The silence that followed felt like a response. It was Marcus who noticed first. "Look," he whispered, pointing across the water. A shape stood on the opposite bank. Even in the fog, they knew it was Ethan. The outline of his jacket, the way he held his shoulders, it was him. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood, staring across the lake. Chris cupped his hands to his mouth. "Ethan, over here!" No reply. The silhouette tilted its head, slowly, almost curiously. Then the fog thickened, swallowing him whole. When it cleared a heartbeat later, the shore was empty. Kayla's voice shook. "Tell me you saw that too." They barely slept. Each gust of wind made the tent walls ripple. Each pop of the fire snapped like a warning. And sometime before dawn, Chris woke to find footprints in the dirt, bare, wet, circling the tent in a perfect ring. When morning came, the ranger's truck was gone, the lot was empty, and the trail map nailed to the post no longer listed Trail 3 at all. It was as if it had never existed.